Welcome to another edition of the TMS Book Club here on ETV. This is the morning show book club, and as per usual, we've got my fave in the building, and I'm hoping she's becoming your fave as well. Sewela Langeni runs the Book Circle Capital, which is the home of the TMS Book Club. How are you, Osi?
I'm good, thanks, and you?
Great, man.
Like a biography. So
Okay.
we've got 3 biographies, and I've selected women biographies, of course.
Right.
So I'm just dragging Women's Month into the rest of the year, just so we
Yes.
celebrate stories about women.
And these are important voices in as far as women are concerned, right? Because they've done quite a lot in empowering other women, leaving the door open, making sure that other women walk in. I mean, Mama Nolitha, Fakude, really a force to be reckoned with in corporate South Africa.
Definitely. I mean, she's been at Woolworths, Anglo-American, Sasol. So Boardroom Dancing, actually, it was published, I think, in 2019, where she chronicles her corporate journey, and she talks about, some of the challenges, some of the wins. She came into this just shortly after 1994. So, things, even though we were free on paper, but in the boardrooms, she was still often found herself being the only woman around the table. So in this book, she lets us in into that journey, some of the challenges, some of the highlights. Show up at her house.
Right.
So she learned a lot about herself then going to school. In this, she highlights the value of education, the value of hard work, the value of networks, and the value of mentorship, just opening yourself to learning from different people. But and the value of also just standing your ground, because often she was challenged by her counterparts and some who were questioning her, her space around the table.
I mean, the corporate environment in any part of the world is very patriarchal.
Yes.
It depends so heavily on males making the decisions. So to be in a woman in that space, being the decision maker takes quite a lot.
Often as women, when we get into these roles, we get that imposter syndrome, and we often even want to change ourselves to be more like men. We become hard, and which is not, some of us, which is not innately who we are. So she talks about that, to say you can still have impact by just being who you are, but know your stuff, prepare, and know that unfortunately you're going to have to work harder, but you've been given the power to do so.
Listen, if you're a young woman who's wanting to infiltrate corporate South Africa or the world, Boardroom Dancing is your book. Go pick it up.
Definitely.
There's another biography that you've got here for us today.
Yes.
Sewela, what is it?
So the next one is Eyebags and Dimples by Mbuli.
Yes.
So then when she first published it, it was Boni Hena, because this book was first published in 2012. But it remains successful. As you can see, it's got this bestseller sticker here. I was told by the publisher that they've done 12 reprints of this book. That's a big achievement for a South African book.
When we say 12 reprints, talk to me about the numbers. What does that actually mean?
So 12 reprints would mean about, they've printed almost like 1,000 with every reprint. So almost 12,000 are out in circulation now.
Sure.
South African booksellers is 10,000. If it's a bookseller, it's 10,000. So if a book has gone over 12,000, that's a good thing. I chose this book because Bonnie was talking about mental health way back when. She becomes naked in her exposure of what she's going through, She bears her soul out about depression. She talks about it from a young age because of a troubling childhood with her mom, a strenuous relationship. And mom also, in retrospect, had her own issues, Father dies very early, troubled relationship, and then she becomes resentful of having to be the only parent staying behind, and she pushes that onto the kids.
Sure.
Today they have a better relationship, but it was very important then for her to tell her story. Meets the love of her life. They go to LA to try and break into that acting scene there, but it doesn't work, And then she still exposes that, and how that darkness was just forever with her. And sometimes even with the characters that she played, influenced how she then behaved. She realizes that as well.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so
Powerful.
interesting. But what I love is she talks about the power of getting the disease diagnosed, getting it addressed through the medical procedures, which is something we clearly talk about today.
Yes.
But you can imagine 10 years ago.
I mean, right now we are inside Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yes.
So I imagine this and other books like it would
Exactly.
be a must-read.
A book like Broken Porcelain by Riliboni, talks about mental wellness. Lots of books right now, but I applaud her that 10 years ago, she could have, that agency to say, this is what's going on.
Okay, Kibona Polypoly, am I reading right?
Yes, you're reading right. Polypoly, which is Mamba Masekela. This is such a nice book. She wrote it 2 years after her brother, Brahu Masekela, died.
Sure.
She talks about how she took care of him, as he was struggling with cancer. And this book was almost like a healing process for her.
Wow.
But why she wrote it was she also wanted to celebrate a matriarch in her life, her grandmother.
Okay.
So she was raised in Witbank, and she was almost resentful because Hugh was raised by the parents and Alex. Remember in the olden days, if parents were also living a certain lifestyle, they would take kids to their grandparents because it was easier to make a living. So she talks about that. Her grandmother, of course, also matriarch during apartheid, had lots of issues. This thing of how we love our kids now, guys, didn't exist.
Sure.
Because they had lots on their mind.
It's a new thing.
Yeah, so she talks about that, but she celebrates her, not in a resentful way, but she
Yes.
celebrates her. She brings her back. She imagines that she would read this and be very happy. She went to exile for more than 20 years, so she takes us to the different countries she goes to. And she raises some of the stuff which I think, especially as South Africa, we could learn from the country. So she says South Africa is very obsessed with ethnicity. Kwenama, Ujwakai,
Yes.
Umuma.
It's our sense of identity.
Yes, when I tell you my name, you need to trace my whole thing.
Right.
If my surname is different, then it's like, okay, what's going on? And she talks about that. She says she's always found that so surprising about South Africans because wherever you went, people just spoke the languages of their mothers and fathers. She, as you can say, she always gets people talking about it in the background, and she responds because she knows all the languages. So. It's a story about she tells her family's history from a different lens because we might think we know based on what we know about Brahu. She brings another layer. She brings a life about herself. She's an activist. She's an academic. She's a poet.
Wow.
So she talks about a lot about that. So that's why I chose this selection. Just things that you thought you knew about this woman that you get to find out in a book.
And what's going to be our takeaway from Polypoly as young readers who watch TMS Book Club?
What I take away from here is she talks about how the intangible stuff about who we are, sitting and getting those memories about who we are based on, because people don't live forever, but if we spend this time doing these exchanges, writing them down can lead to preserving our history.
I love that. I'm looking forward to our next one. Do you have like a tease nyana for next time?
I know that there's a book from Nechama Brody called Farm Killings. I want to get into that. I know it because remember we always stuck at the headlines.
Yeah.
But she goes into research about farm killings to say this is what's happening, and the story is not what we always think we know.
Right.
The different players who are trying to frame their agenda based on their own,
There's
interests.
always someone who's controlling the narrative.
Exactly. So there's a new book about Nechama Brody called Farm Killings. I saw a recent book by Lincoln Mali, Blazing a Trail. These books that are bringing us into boardrooms that we were often not in, but they're telling us how they grew up. In most Black people, you're first generation trying to do something.
Yes.
A book then becomes your way to try and understand, okay, how did this person do it? Because issue of access remains a big deal. So more and more biographies about people that have made it are important, and there's a lot coming.
I love that. Sewela Langeni runs the Book Circle Capital, and that's the home of the TMS Book Club. All the books you need to read right now. Stay with us.